the subject of leadership is really central in this, because years ago, actually, when the fifth discipline was first finished, the MIT Management Magazine, Sloan Management Review, wanted a short article because the book was becoming popular, so you need something short. And that first article was eventually published under the title, The Leader's New Work, Building Learning Organizations. Because we realized that it's another very useful way to talk about this whole field, to focus on leadership. Now, it was about that same time, within a few years, that we were building a strategic partnership, which was extremely helpful for the development of the field, but particularly for understanding leadership. And that partnership was with the United States Army. Now, I use that as an example because the military organizations are the archetypal hierarchy, right? So, and as far as I know, the Army is not going to get rid of its hierarchy. It's going to have corporals, and it's going to have lieutenants, and it's going to have captains and colonels. But the Army has been around a long time, so many hundreds of years. So they have a lot of historical perspective. They can see times when the hierarchy has been massively dysfunctional. For the U.S. Army, the Vietnam War was a horrible experience. Massive dysfunction, corruption throughout the hierarchy. And it was a great learning process. They'll tell you that it took really over a decade to kind of really come to terms with all the ways the hierarchy had become corrupt. Because that's the problem with hierarchy. It's not inherently bad, but easily hierarchies can become corrupt, and it becomes about power and status and do what I say because I'm the boss, right? So, but by the time we had started to work with the Army, they had come through a big learning process. And there's a saying that is very popular still today in the Army: your first day as a leader is your first day on the job. And it's a great saying because they have worked for years to develop a concept of leadership for the corporal, the lowest level in the hierarchy. And they'll say, you're a leader, and they really mean it. And your scope of your leadership is this. But by the time you get to be a sergeant, your scope of leadership might be this. And a lieutenant might be like this, and on up through the hierarchy. But the principles of leadership are no different. Imagination, commitment, dedication, a sense of quality, and caring about other people. Doesn't matter what role you're in, but the scope is different. And interestingly, coincidentally, over the years, we found that some of the organizations, business organizations, we had the longest term partnership with, had a lot of people who had been in the military. One of the ones that I really remember well, because it was a great partnership, was with Boeing. So we had a long-term partnership with Boeing. And one of the guys who we worked with a lot up until about 3 years ago when he retired, his name was Dennis O'Donohue. And in Boeing, he was responsible for all testing. So that's the flight testing of new planes, but there's real-time testing going on. You know, there's 30 or 40,000 Boeing airplanes in the air around the world at all times, and they're being continually tested. So he was responsible for that testing also. But of course, his original training was as a test pilot. So he'd come out of the military, he was a test pilot, who then became Boeing's key test pilot for all their new planes, and then gradually he became a senior executive responsible for all testing. And I'll never forget talking with Dennis, because he built a great organization. I mean, we did a lot of work with Boeing Test Organization, and they were a great learning organization. And he used to always say, well, everything I learned about leadership I learned in the Marines. He was a Marine test pilot. And he said, you really understand if you're in a good military organization that everybody's a leader, but the scope differs. Same thing I said a minute ago. So that idea that leadership is not hierarchical is a very radical idea. And it's very, very important. I think management by its nature is hierarchical. If you're a manager, you can be held accountable for results produced by other people. That's a hierarchy. Okay, it's not good or bad, but that's the essence of a hierarchy. A system of accountability where I'm held accountable for results that other people produce. That's what it means to be a manager. So in that sense, I think management is inherently hierarchical, and I think leadership is inherently not hierarchical. And that's a profound confusion. It's a huge confusion that infects many, many organizations, private sector, public sector. The leaders are them. But I think that's wrong. I think that's really a distorted notion of leadership. I mean, the original root of the verb to lead, which is very old in our Western languages, it's actually Indo-European root, and it's typically written L-E-I-T-H, lithe. It means to step ahead. And I always think that's a beautiful image. Who are the leaders? They're the people stepping ahead. They have the courage, the imagination, they're willing to take a risk, they're willing to fail, they're stepping ahead. And that has nothing to do with position. So that's why you can have an organization of leaders. I don't think that's a romantic or idealistic notion at all. I think if you don't have that image, you'll never have real leadership. You won't have the commitment to each person growing and developing to be the leader they can be in the role they're in.